April 5th, 2001. My name is Jerome Ferry. My cameraman is Alan Eggers. This is an oral interview with Grant Bramel of 1309 Brendel Hill Drive in Cedar Rapids. Grant, where were you born and where were you born?
On a farm about 10 miles west of Decatur, Illinois in 1922. We still own some of the land down there. It's been from the time we got it from the government. In fact, I have a patent out here.
Were you born on the farm?
Yeah, as far as I know. I don't really know that for sure. Right. Yeah.
And this would have been back in the Depression era?
Yes, very much so. I remember corn for 10 cents a bushel, so it was cheaper fuel than coal.
Yeah. Did your dad lose the farm or?
No, in later years I realized what a struggle he was going through.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
No brothers and sisters. I had two uncles that were closest to being brothers. They're just 4 years older than I was. Incidentally, both of them were in the Air Force.
What were growing up on a farm as a young boy? I recall a lot of my own fond experiences. What do you remember most of being a kid growing up on the farm?
Well, one of the things I remember is, as I remember it now, and looking back, I know it was character building, because I suppose I was in high school, and by that time you had a tractor cultivator, and my dad could cultivate in 30 minutes what I could do in a whole day, but he still had me cultivating corn with a two-horse team. But you know, it's nice to look back on though, because everybody was poor and you didn't think of yourself. You didn't know you were poor. I didn't know I was poor until I, in later years, looked at a school picture of the country school that I went to, and boy, everybody had patches on the patches. About 20 kids in school for 8 grades.
Did you go barefooted in the summertime?
Oh yes, oh yes. Yeah.
How about a creek? Did you have a creek on your place?
Had a Sangamon River bordered, so that I learned we did fishing and that sort of thing early on.
You had mentioned a patent earlier when I asked you if you were born and raised on a farm.
A what?
A patent?
Oh, no, well, that's what I was talking about there, was a government patent, or that's what they called, what the government conveys federal land to an individual. So that this is for 80 acres, which is still part of our farm, dated 1839 and signed by Martin Van Buren.
Was this homesteaded? Your dad homesteaded this land, or your
My
grandpa?
great-great-great-grandfather. And incidentally, I've got a history book of Macon County that was published in about 1870, and in it relates his experiences with one of his neighbors who was Abraham Lincoln. That was along the Sangamon River west of Decatur, about 10 miles.
So, Grant, when did you first become interested in aviation? Did something inspire you, or?
Well, you know, all the hype that went on a long time I was in high school and that sort of thing. That boy, and the time Pearl Harbor came, everybody wanted, I mean, that was the highest thing you could do, was to be a pilot. So that two of my friends and I went to Peoria and were able to get enlisted in the Aviation Cadet Program. But it was just seemed so much more attractive than being a foot soldier or something like that.
When you were growing up as a young boy, had you ever heard of Orville, or Wilbur and Orville, right, of
Right.
course, but also Charles Lindbergh.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, we had in there in central Illinois, there was a family of brothers, Moody brothers, that were early flyers. So my first remembrance of flying is they'd come and land in pastures and that sort of thing Sunday afternoon and take people a ride. So that I must have been 5 or 6 years old and my uncle took me on one of
Yeah.
those rides.
Did your mother know it?
Oh, yeah, right, right.
And at that time, did any thought of flight ever stick with you, that someday I'm going to fly one of these airplanes?
No, not really. I mean, really, things were so darn poor on the farm that that was another world.
Just out of the question.
That's right, that's right.
So you got your, so you went on to getting your license after you got into the military.
It's only, I never did have a civilian license.
You never did have one.
No.
And then you took your training when, and then where did you go to after?
Well, I took basic, just along with the draftees at Shepherd Field, Wichita Falls, Texas. And that was about 6 or 8 weeks, I suppose. And then the pre-aviation cadets were shipped to Classification Center at Nashville, Tennessee. And you spent about a week taking both written exams and then a lot of things like Rorschach tests. And as I look back on it, there was an awful lot of looking at these colored parts or charts to determine how good your sight was and color blindness and anything like that. So in that, you usually came out, most people that went to that because they'd already had some screening, that you came out qualified for bombardier, navigator, pilot's training. I was fortunate to get pilot's training. And from there, it was there in 1943, 44. Things were stacked up. So I've always looked back now and see that's why they had college training detachments, because that was just storage until there was room in flight schools. So I went to the University of Tennessee for 2 months. And while I was there, I called my girlfriend who was still back in college and said, how about coming down on Easter weekend, we'll get married, and we did. And then after two months of that, space was open in the class of 44C, so I went to what they call Air University, I guess, one of the 3 of them at Maxwell Field in Montgomery, Alabama.
Did you know what type of plane you were going to fly at this time?
No.
What was you hoping you would get to fly?
Well, what I eventually got into, fighters would be, that, as I recall, the only real choice I ever got to make was after having graduated as single engine pilot, got the choice between either going to Europe or the South Pacific, and I didn't think I wanted to be out there flying a single engine plane over 1,500 miles between islands. Yeah.
So where did you finally get stationed when they shipped you out?
Well, I had, after getting my wings and commission as second lieutenant, then the 3rd Air Force, the headquarters at Tallahassee, Dale Mabry Field, which was fighter training. That was about 2 months flying P-40s. And then with that training, then you're ready to go overseas, so I went to Italy.
When you were training, did they I assume you had target practice
Oh, yeah.
in shooting your guns. What did you shoot at for targets?
Well, some of, in the P-40s, the field I was flying off was way across Georgia, so that's very close to the Georgia coast. So that we went out over Brunswick, Georgia, out to sea from there, and you'd have one P-40 pulling a sleeve, target sleeve, and you'd shoot at that. Then the strafing and that sort of thing, that was at Eglin Field down west of, or in the Pensacola area. That is a tremendous area, that air base, and out in the brush, and all the things that you could practice strafing and doing dive bombing and drop, or skip bombing, really, we did skip bombing.
Did you, was there such a thing as any accuracy to your guns? I mean, did they have sights on them that
Oh,
you
yeah.
could?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you had the gun sight right up in front of the middle of your windshield.
Is that the type of sight, if you got a target within the outline of that sight, there's a pretty good chance of you hitting it?
Yes, except what the tricky part was leading a target that was in a turn, and that sort of thing. Just like hunting squirrels with a rifle or something like that.
Or shooting a pheasant on the fly?
That's right. Yeah.
Did you fly support to B-17s or?
15th Air Force was called a strategic Air Force, like the 8th Air Force flying out of England. So that they had, I don't know how many groups of B-24s and B-17s. And then there were two fighter wings. Ours was P-51s, and there was a P-38 fighter wing. So that that was, look, I suppose half of my missions were escort for those. Not, we were always glad to escort B-17s instead of B-24s, because the B-17s flew higher, and you get above 20,000 feet, and anti-aircraft became much less accurate.
But then again, too, you had to use oxygen.
You'd used in flying like P-51s, your microphone was in your oxygen mask, so that you had that on from the time you strapped yourself in your seat.
When you were flying with covering the B-17s, how many would P-51s would normally accompany a squadron of?
Well, a squadron was 4 flights of 4 planes each, and you usually started out on the mission with 2 spares along, so somebody developed engine trouble or something like that, so we could, and then there were 3 squadrons in a group. And you know, usually a squadron, well, like, I remember our squadron had top cover on a all-out raid on Berlin, so that our 16 planes flying at 38,000 feet for 20 minutes. And that's all you had fuel for, because then you had to be headed for home.
What speed did you normally fly at?
You would, the P-51 was redlined at about 515 mile an hour, but you'd be putting fuel through that like a sieve if you, so that normally you were climbing out at 200 to 220, and then flying straight and level probably 350 or something.
Tell us some of your experiences, any experiences over in Italy. You said you were stationed.
Yeah.
Anything that stuck with you over the years?
Well, most
good or bad?
The most memorable day was on March 31st of 1945. We had been up on a fighter sweep over Lake Balaton, which is in the Budapest, Vienna area. And our 16 planes got credit for destroying the 16 German planes in the air. And being March 31st, we got home. It was payday, but most of them, I had a cablegram from my wife saying that her daughter had been born. So
That had been a good day.
that was a good day. A memorable day. It was that raid I was talking about when we went to Berlin, but that was a long haul for us flying out of Italy. And another one was on the specialized kind of missions that we flew. Was that I was one of 6 planes that escorted this B-17 across the Adriatic over to Yugoslavia. And the reason escorted the B-17 was because General Twining, who was the commander of 15th Air Force, was going over there and land on a strip and have a meeting with the leaders of some partisans. Yugoslavia at that time was part of it was held friendly and part of it not. So that I flew over there. I happened to have the newest P-51 on flight, so they asked me to tuck up under the wing of the B-17 so they could take pictures of it. And supposedly they're going to send me some pictures, copy the picture, but I never did get them.
Is that a photo there of the plane, similar to the one you flew?
That one is, yeah.
Now that, when you were flying that plane, was it terribly noisy in
No,
there
no,
when you were
no.
shooting your guns and
Well, no, not really. Of course, when you were shooting your guns, you were
your
so
adrenaline,
excited.
your
You're-
adrenaline was
Yeah,
flowing?
you're so excited that you wouldn't, I think
Didn't register with you.
the closest call I ever had was that it was up in southern Germany and on fighter sweep to bring everything to a standstill. So that there was a train and the train had pulled down into a valley, and you never did, if you're going to strafe a train, you didn't go the length of it because they had a flat car at the back of it. So we're going crosswise, and as one thing that always amazed me was, and I had missed the last week of the war because I'd been to rest camp, and was glad I had. I'd been very dangerous. But within just a matter of days, they had the whole 15th Air Force arranged to have a sort of a victory lap. We flew a triangular mission, and it amazed me at how fast they could put that sort of thing together. And of course, another week, and I was on a ship out of Naples coming back home.
I can imagine you made a lot of close friends in your flying group over there. Did you ever lose any of your best friends in battle?
Yeah, one of them was the hot pilot type. He had been an instructor down at Luke Field in Arizona and chafed at having to stay stateside and be an instructor. So he came over and was in our squadron, and he got shot down once over Yugoslavia and walked back through Greece. But I was on the same mission with him and saw him, we were strafing an airfield over there. And our flight went through, but he was in the second one. And he got knocked down just as he was making a low-level pass.
When you were stationed over in Italy, how did the Italians treat you?
Wonderful. I was, really enjoyed them and had a great deal of sympathy for them because, boy, that country had gotten beaten up. But as an example of that, we had a family in this little town where our base was up north of Ancona that did our laundry. And through visiting, found out they had a daughter that was going to get married. And it was a hard thing for her, what she was going to wear. So I was able to get a damaged parachute and gave to them, and that's what they made her wedding gown out of. But as an example, in that same base, there we heard all the church bells pealing one day, and we didn't know what they were pealing about. But in a little while, we found out it was when Mussolini and his mistress Clara Petracci had been caught and strung up. I think it was in Milan, and all the Italians in the countryside were celebrating, and they were glad they had come back.
Mussolini was a good friend of Hitler,
Yeah.
if I remember right.
Yeah. It's interesting how that relationship came about.
How do you suppose he kept such a good friendship with Hitler and the people of his country hated the conditions that they were in and hated himself?
Well, without much news, I think you really wouldn't know what. Oh, there's one other incident, but I think is the greatest coincidence in my experience, was that flying a P-51, we always thought we were the king of the mountain, and there wasn't anything we knew of that could fly above us. And we had been on this mission at something in the 30,000 feet. And we saw these trails, must have been another 20, 25,000 feet above us. And when we came back, shortly after that, we found out that it was the first time that we were seeing the Messerschmitt 163, which was the German rocket plane. And it was a Delta wing plane, and it was designed by Alexander Lippisch. So I considered it one of my great coincidences of my life, coming back here to Cedar Rapids and getting well acquainted with Alex and his wife, visited them in their home many times.
Did that startle you to see that plane that high above you?
Yes, however, as we got briefed on the thing, we really didn't consider it too much of a threat. Although what it did was make it so you didn't want to get caught without a wingman. Always have at least two planes so that you could spread out and each one cover each other's tail, because the ME-163, first of all, had very short fuel endurance, and second, it's going so darn fast that if you saw it, you could just turn inside of it.
Not to, along those lines, one thing I've wanted to ask you, and I've been asking some of the different aviators, did you ever hear of UFOs then, when you flew unidentified flying objects?
No.
You never seen anything strange other than Lippisch's plane?
No.
10,000 feet above
That's
you?
right. That's right, yeah. Moved up, the first base I flew off of was down at San Severo, Italy, which is directly across from Naples. Then we moved on up to a base just north of Ancona, and it was right on the Adriatic, and there was a railroad between our airstrip and the Adriatic, but what our quarters was this big farmhouse that was 3 stories, built, there was masonry. The first floor was where they had their livestock. Second floor was like the dining room and that sort of thing. And the third floor you slept in. Well, I was with the advance party that went up there, and we were sleeping on our cots on the 3rd floor. You turn out the lights and you hear the rats jumping up on your bedroll or on your sleeping bag. So the way the place was built is a doorway like that, with a, you had to step up, I suppose, 8 to 10 inches above to go into the place. So we got a sheet of metal put up there. We're going to keep those rats out. And turn out the light, and you hear the thump, thump as the rats were jumping into it. But the problem was solved to get in that lower level, get the grain and the hay and the manure all cleaned out and down there, so that ended up the rat. One of the, fortunately, you had one room in that big building that was sort of the relaxing room, so that one night heard this noise, and some of the guys had had a little bit too much cognac, and they were using their .45s and trying to shoot rats. You can imagine, it wouldn't have been a very safe place to be in this masonry walled room, and shooting a .45 revolver.
Was this the custom over there that the farm families house their livestock right in the house with where they lived?
Yeah, talking about what things were like for the Italians. This naturally was in a farming area, and they had their fields divided up with rows of trees, like hedgerows, and there were other kind of trees that grew much taller than that. And they had, we were seeing these Italians that would have these big tall nets that they would put on each side of the field there. And they would bait the space in between with grain, and the larks would come in there, and they'd trip these nets, and that was the only meat those people were getting. So it was a...
Were you still stationed there when the war ended?
Yeah, right.
What was it like? A lot of celebration, or?
Well, really it was so rural that I don't remember anything like hearing the church bells when Mussolini was killed and that sort of thing. And it's really amazing how little you really know what was going on. For instance, with us being down there in Italy, I don't recall having any awareness of the Battle of the Bulge, because they just didn't pass that service. It wouldn't have been that good for morale, I suppose, to be letting everybody know.
You had mentioned you're talking about Lippish's plane at that time. Can you tell us about how you come to meet him when you?
Well, we lived out on Cottage Glen, which is right at the top of the hill in Cottage Grove, east of Washington High School. And of course, Lippish's lived right across the Indian Creek and backed up to the Cedar Rapids Country Club. And Gertrude came to church at First Presbyterian Church, I think she did. And anyway, that's where we met her, and back and forth visiting her, and in the process getting acquainted with Alex too. Yeah. Gertrude was his second wife, and he had children by his first wife. They had an interesting story that makes you appreciate having news that you can trust. They were living down, I would assume that would have been probably in like Vienna area, someplace like that. And nobody was telling them that the Germans were about to lose the war. But they decided that things weren't looking too good. So that they packed up their things, including taking pictures out of the frames and rolling them up. And then they got a wood-burning truck with an engine that burned wood, and they traveled at night and got across into Switzerland, so that they were out, I think, before the war ended. But, and Alex, naturally, being one of their aeronautical engineers and designers, why you would expect him to be a little better informed. But I think he came this country along the same time with Werner von Braun and that group of scientists.
In knowing Dr. Lippisch, did he openly tell you this, how he got out?
Yes, I remember it was he and Gertrude one afternoon that they showing us things that they brought out, and they had reframed the pictures and had them hanging in their house and that sort of thing. So
To introduce your wife to us.
Yes, this is that little lady that came down to Knoxville, Tennessee, and we got married on the first weekend I could have off out of, she was teaching school back in Central Illinois. And she had a lot of interesting experiences following me from base to base, doing a lot of things that you wouldn't want your daughter doing now. For instance, when we were at Montgomery, Alabama, the distance that she walked to get to the field, and within the year there was another wife that was living in the same general area that was killed.
Murdered.
Just murdered.
Do you have a picture of Grant when he was young and dashing back then?
Oh, I'm sure, because we were both in school together. But anyway, you see, Grant would go, you know, of course, with the base that was going on to the next place. And then here came the wives. And, you know, then you'd have to find a place, because you see, one group would move out, and here another group came in for just the 2 months. And you'd find a place, you know, and it was usually just one room. And I remember I was doing the washing in the bathtub, and my washing in the bathtub, and then I had to walk to the base. And in this one place was in Jackson, Mississippi, and I remember I walked down the railroad track to get to the base. And you know, it was things like that. And of course now, if you thought your daughter was walking down the railroad track, you know, I don't really suppose my folks even knew it. But.
We were talking earlier about the Depression. The Depression continued, and she was a college graduate, had her teacher's certificate, but when I was at primary school in Union City, Tennessee, and she got a room and found a job as a caretaker for this family that had 2 children. And she got the stupendous compensation of $5 a week and some meals, I guess, for taking care of those children.
And I'd been teaching school, you know, and then here, you know, of course you thought $5 a week that paid for the bedroom, you know. I stayed in the bedroom about, a couple blocks from there. But, you didn't think a thing about it then. I mean, that's just, you know, you were there, and so.
Can you relate any of your associations with the Lippisch family when you met them here in Cedar Rapids?
The Lippisch?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, we talked, I was a very good friend of his wife, Mrs. Lippisch, and we met each Sunday night. And I was just very, very fond of Gertrude.
Was he a likable person?
Yes, but, well, he didn't really mix in with the Sunday night.
No, he was quite a bit older than Gertrude. So
and you talked and visited, but, you know, when we would then get with our little group, why, he didn't get in our discussions.
Were you aware that Dr. Lippisch got his first interest of flight? The Wright brothers put on an air demonstration in Tempelhof, Germany.
no.
No,
And Dr. Lippisch, as a young boy, was there
Oh, really?
witnessing it, and that's what instilled in him
Oh.
to pursue a career in aviation.
Mm-hmm. It's a tangled world, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
and just to think that of all places that we were transferred, to think we were here, with Lippisch, you know,
Yes,
so.
a coincidence.
Uh-huh.
You ready?
Go ahead.
So when you left service, why did you decide to come back to Cedar Rapids?
Well, I had to finish college, so that we had, as I said earlier, we had our daughter then, but I went back to Millikan University in Decatur, Illinois, to finish up for my degree, And then after graduating from Millikan, I took a job with Quaker Oats in Chicago. And from there was transferred out to Fort Dodge, Iowa, 1953, and then to Cedar Rapids in 1961.
And how long did you work with Quaker?
Till they sold the two operations that I managed. There's the line of country elevators. They had about 70 country elevators at its biggest, in ranging from South Dakota. 50 of them were in northwest quarter of Iowa, and then about a dozen in Illinois, and 3 down the Mississippi Delta. But those were sold, so that, and I was also a region manager of the feed division, and that was sold to Continental Grain Company. So that was in about 1969.
And then what did you do throughout your lifetime? Did you work or a housewife?
No, when we got here to Cedar Rapids, Cedar Rapids at that time had decided there was only money enough for one Head Start. But they decided to put in each, special area. The church, we used the church basements, and I taught, it was a preschool for,
Like Head Start.
just like Head Start, except the group that I was with, it wasn't paying, but it was people that need to go to Head Start, but see, there wasn't enough. So for around 7 years, I had a preschool for this group, and it would be different each year. But we were given the names of the people from the county office of who was low income. And I taught for 7 years, and had it in the basement of the Presbyterian Church.
Well, the History Center would like to thank you very much for sharing your memories with us, and I hope you get to live a long and healthy life.
Thank you. Oh,
It doesn't do a great deal for your morale to be reading all the time that 1,600 World War II veterans are dying every day, does it?
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank